Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the second Reddit talk. Thank you to the organizers for including me on the program. I'm Alex Moehring. I'm a PhD student at MIT, and I'm excited to share what was my job market paper, Personalized Rankings and User Engagement and Empirical Evaluation of the Reddit newsfeed. So let's dive on it. So I want to start by noticing that a common feature of many of the largest social media platforms today is that the platform has access to nearly unlimited pieces of content, while each individual user only has a finite amount of attention to allocate to the platform. So I think this sort of simple example here kind of builds this intuition where even if we restrict to the space of news media, it's pretty easy to see that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of publishers across the world. Each of these publishers is generating multiple articles on a day. It's totally infeasible to think that any single user could even consider engaging with all of this content that's available to the platform. So as a result, the platform by necessity has to curate content for its users. And as we've talked about at this conference, one of the most common ways that this is done today is by the platform generating a ranked feed. And oftentimes these feeds are ranked in such a way as to maximize predicted engagement. So at a high level, my job market paper is going to ask what is the impact of this decision to rank content by predicted engagement on the type of content that users are engaging with. That's a little bit vague, so I'll try and give you a little bit more detail. I will be thinking about a setting that is very similar to this example. Users will encounter a ranked feed of news articles about US political news, and the users will comment and discuss these articles in comment threads. So when I talk about engagement today, I'm going to be talking specifically about the decision to comment on an article, but we could, of course, think about other forms of engagement as well. An important feature of this type of content, of news articles, that I'm going to focus on is going to be the credibility rating of the article's publisher. And so a publisher's credibility rating is a score that's meant to capture an aggregate summary of the journalistic quality of an outlet. You can think of more credible publishers as having fewer failed fact checks, higher quality of sourcing, among other things. So at a high level, I'll be asking if the decision to rank content by predicted engagement, how this impacts the credibility of news content that users are engaging with. So let's briefly motivate this exercise. I want to start by sharing this quote by Mark Zuckerberg, which I think captures this widespread belief that less credible content is more engaging online. So Mark says that one of the biggest issues social networks face today is when left unchecked, people engage disproportionately with more sensationalist and provocative content. He goes on to say the category they're most focused on is clickbait and misinformation. He closes by saying people consistently tell us this type of content makes our services worse, even though they're engaging with it. So to summarize, Mark is saying that low credibility news content, which certainly includes clickbait misinformation, is more engaging online. It stands to reason that if we apply an engagement maximizing algorithm on top of such a setting, this is exactly the type of content that's going to be promoted to users. And this will be a claim that I'm testing empirically today. So we might ask ourselves, why do we care about the credibility of news content that users are engaging with? And I want to hopefully motivate this by sharing 3 examples of platform stakeholders who have begun to think about this issue. The first is policymakers. So policymakers around the world have either proposed or in some cases actually enacted regulations of platform ranking algorithms that are motivated in part by this concern that engagement maximizing algorithms and personalization in particular is inducing users to engage with low credibility news content. The most common policy proposal today is to require platforms to allow users to opt out of personalized feeds. So again, the thinking is that personalization is really the issue here. I will come back to this at the end of the talk and sort of comment on how my results maybe speak to some of these policies, but to give a preview, I'm not super optimistic about personalization opt-outs in impacting the composition of users. Second, advertisers might care about the content that they appear alongside. So there have been a number of sort of highly publicized advertiser bans where advertisers are hesitant to appear alongside or even on platforms that promote low quality news content. And then finally, platform managers have begun to think about the credibility of news content that's appearing in their feeds. Facebook's been a leader in this space, starting to incorporate trusted news sources as an additional signal in their ranking. So with that, I'll share my sort of specific research questions. A key ingredient to understanding how different types of algorithms impact the type of news content users are engaging with, and just understanding how important the ranking algorithm is at steering attention into engagement to promoted articles. So another way of saying this is I want to estimate the causal effective rank on engagement. It's pretty easy to see there's an endogeneity issue here. So I'm going to estimate the causal effective rank on engagement using a regression discontinuity that's based on the platform source code. I'll tell you a lot about that in a couple slides. Second, I will estimate a model of users' engagement decisions. The idea is that users visit the platform, they're exposed to a subset of articles that's partially determined by the platform's ranking algorithm, and the users will decide whether or not to comment on these articles that they're exposed to based on their own preferences and article features. And then I will use this choice model to tackle the first question of substance, where I'll ask if engagement-based rankings promote and induce users to engage with less credible news publishers. And so to tackle this question, I will use this model of engagement to estimate engagement patterns under counterfactual ranking algorithms. So I'll be able to ask, what piece of the content would a user have engaged with had the platform been using something like personalized engagement maximization, which will be a key counterfactual of interest. Finally, I will try and evaluate the cost of the platform of including publisher credibility in its ranking algorithm in terms of foregone engagement. So I will plot out the efficient frontier between publisher credibility and total engagement, and sort of vary the weight I put on publisher credibility, excuse me, to try and understand the platform's trade-offs a little bit more carefully. What do I find? In 2024, I think the answer to the first two questions are not super surprising. Ranking algorithms matter a lot, and steering attention engagement to promoted articles, and there's a ton of heterogeneity in people's preferences for news content online. What I think is maybe a little more surprising is when we think about how engagement-based rankings influence the credibility of news content that users are engaging with. I find actually that for the majority of users, things seem to work pretty well. So for the majority of users, engagement maximization induces them to engage with a slightly larger share of high credibility publishers as a result. However, for the a minority of users, some of the concerns that Mark Zuckerberg alluded to appear well-founded. And so for these users, engagement maximization induces them to engage with a substantially larger share of low credibility news content as a result. So it seems engagement maximization is pushing users apart and kind of sorting them along this credibility dimension. When we think about what we can do about this, I find what I think is a pretty optimistic result for managers in that for a modest cost in terms of foregone engagement, the platform can substantially increase the share of engagement with high credibility publishers by incorporating publisher credibility in its ranking algorithm. Okay, so with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Reddit. We already know a lot about Reddit, thanks to Varad's overview. And then I'll dive into some of the analyses that I'll So as we know, Reddit's a large social media platform organized into many virtual communities called subreddits. And I will be focusing in particular on the politics subreddit. So in this community, users share and discuss news articles about US political news. If you were to visit the platform, you would see a ranked feed of news articles, not unlike this screenshot at the top of the feed. And then as I mentioned, users will comment and discuss these articles in comment threads. I'm going to argue that this is kind of an ideal laboratory to tackle this question for a couple different reasons. So first, this is a very large community. It's important to the platform. There's a ton of heterogeneity, both people's preferences as well as the content that's available to users, or it's available to the platform to be shown to users. And this is a feature that's representative of many of the largest social media platforms today. So I think this is important when we think about how some of these findings may generalize to other settings. Second, it's important that it's feasible to study this question on Reddit. So Reddit has historically been very transparent, allowing me both to collect high quality data and understand in detail how the platform ranks content. And this will be sort of the key insight into my identification strategy, which I'll tell you about in a couple slides. And then finally, one of the reasons I picked the politics community, and a community where users are sharing and discussing news articles, is that I can rely on sort of established measures of content credibility in the form of these credibility ratings, which again, I'll tell you a little bit more about. We could think of other, sorry, questions?
Why don't you finish that line and then I'll.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, in other settings of user-generated content, it's hard to think about how we would measure content credibility, and so that's one of the reasons we selected this.
Yeah. And I guess my follow-up to that is, are we worried about potential slant amongst the user base? Reddit tends to be overwhelmingly left-leaning. If you look at politics as a community, also tends to be very left-leaning. Kind of how will that potentially, interact with credibility, or is that even what users are looking for in these contexts when really maybe they're looking for like reinforcement or slant or something.
Totally, yeah. So I'll show you a little bit of evidence along these lines, but I think the point is well taken that this community is probably not a representative sample of social media users more broadly. What I hope becomes clear is that the sort of sufficient statistics for my results are the joint distribution of content that's available and user preferences. And then we can think about, if we're generalizing to some other setting, we can sort of move mass around in this joint distribution, and it's pretty easy to see how that'll translate to results, but happy to discuss that if that's not clear.
I understand that it's good to have a clear measure of credibility in this study,
yeah.
But I believe that one potential problem is that in other settings, users do not really know what is credible and what is not, right? Can you think that your study can extend in these type of situations?
I think that's a great question, and I am going to punt a little bit. That's an open question of how we can define content credibility in other settings, which are very important. So like YouTube videos, there's a lot of low quality information out there. Thinking about how we can sort of generate credibility ratings for that seems like that'd be very valuable, but I certainly don't have the answer. Next question. Yes?
Did you expand a bit what you mean by engagement-based rankings? Like if you compare chronological feed versus ranked feed on Facebook, for example, there's just like way more crap in chronological feed.
Yeah.
And part of that is because the ranking, it's not just engagement, but it's also like probability this is a scam and other things are factored in. So
Sorry.
it's just like, how should I think about this like external validity from like Reddit to other settings to be?
Yes. So I agree that there are tons of problems with something like reverse chronological, and I'm not going to be able to comment on that given my data, because the counterfactual I'm going to have in mind is re-ranking the first page on the politics feed. So this already has like a filter for like a lot of the low quality stuff that would appear in reverse chron, spam, for example, or whatever. So there's already a quality filter here, and I would just think about how we could re-rank this and sort of the positive implications of different ways of doing this on total engagement and engagement with high credibility publishers. But yeah, I think that's a total fair point. Thanks. Okay, great. The data I collect, I'm going to combine data from 3 different sources. First, I will want to observe at various points in time the state of the feed. This includes the position of various articles, the number of votes an article has, etc. To collect this, I'm going to scrape historical snapshots of the subreddit feed from the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. And this will allow me to observe everything in the screenshot I showed you on the previous page, as well as some other helpful information. I will also, of course, want some measure of user engagement as an outcome. For this, I'll use a data set of user-level comments. It's kind of an amazing data set. It contains a near universe of comments submitting to the platform. It has some sort of nice features that I can take advantage of. So first, every comment is timestamped, which means I can isolate the comments that occur immediately following each of these snapshots, which will be the key outcome of interest that I will be thinking about. But I observe the user identifier of the user who submitted this comment. So this would be useful in my choice model when I'm trying to allow for preference heterogeneity, because I observe repeated decisions by the same user over time. So this panel structure of the data is quite useful. And then also, I'm not going to do the same sentiment analysis that we talked about, but a benefit of comments is we observe the sentiment of comments. So I can do some analysis similar to what we saw previously. Finally, I will merge in a few different publisher features. This will include a measure of a publisher's political slant, how preferred they are by Democrats to Republicans, as well as a measure of the publisher's credibility, which again is meant to capture an aggregate summary of the journalistic quality of an outlet.
Are the user level comments, are those push shift or are they live API?
Push shift, yeah. Okay, so before we move forward, I think it's helpful just to sort of fix our thinking on the space of content that's available. So here I'm plotting the joint distribution of publisher slant and publisher credibility in this community. So each point here is a publisher. On the x-axis, we have publisher slant, which ranges from -1 to +1. -1 the publisher that's most preferred by Democrats, +1 the publisher that's most preferred by Republicans. And then we have an ordinal measure of credibility on the y-axis. I've colored in a few publishers you may have heard of. New York Times and Wall Street Journal are pretty central, maybe slightly left of center on the New York Times, but pretty high credibility. MSNBC and Fox News, a little bit more politically slanted, slightly lower credibility. The other thing that's like quite obvious from this picture is that these two measures are related. So publishers that tend to be more politically extreme also tend to be less credible on average. And this will be important when we think about, when we interpret some of these results. This will be an important ingredient to some of these other counterfactuals. Yes?
Just how do you measure slant when you're calculating?
So I'm using established measures. So slant comes from, I didn't do this analysis, but there's a paper that compares known partisans on Twitter and calculates essentially the relative propensity of a domain being shared by a known Democrat relative to a known Republican. So that's how slant's measured. And then the credibility ratings comes, this is an aggregate of this comes from Dave Brand's lab. What they do is they aggregate credibility ratings from a number of different sort of professional ratings. Agencies is the wrong word, maybe rating organizations. And so they rate publishers on a rubric of different things, including how many times you fail a fact check, how transparent your funding, do you publish a correction if you make a mistake, et cetera. Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. So I now want to talk about how I estimate the causal effect of rank on engagement, which will be a key ingredient to identifying this choice model that I will build up to. So article ranks endogenous. We're probably concerned the existing ranking algorithm is promoting articles that are high quality. Users would comment on them irrespective of their rank. So we have to be a little bit more careful. I'm going to rely on Reddit's historic transparency. So until 2017, Reddit actually maintained an open source mirror of their source code, which is like, you know, kind of crazy, but also kind of awesome for us because we can actually go and inspect the algorithm that's used to rank articles. And fortunately, it's a very simple algorithm. What this algorithm does is it combines the age of an article with the net number of upvotes minus downvotes that article has received, and then just sorts articles according to this ranking score. This is something I can reconstruct given my scraped data, and this will allow me to estimate the causal effect of rank on engagement using a regression discontinuity. This figure will hopefully build the intuition for the RD that I'm exploiting. What I'm plotting here is among articles ranked in position 1 and position 2. The x-axis is plotting the difference in a focal article's ranking score with that of the adjacent article, and the y-axis, is plotting the probability that a focal article is ranked lower on the feed. That this function goes from 0 to 1 at the threshold of 0, tells us that Reddit is in fact ranking articles according to this algorithm we've reconstructed. As the focal article's ranking score surpasses that of the adjacent article, there's a discontinuity in the ranks, which is what I'll be exploiting. Here, I can plot the sort of same RD plot, except with the outcome on the y-axis, which is the log number of comments an article receives in the 20 minutes following each snapshot. There's a discontinuity in this outcome, which is exactly the treatment effect we want to estimate. And we can estimate this using local linear regression, not only for position 1 versus position 2, but for every adjacent pair of positions on the feed. So each point here in this figure on the right is plotting the local average treatment effect of an article being promoted from position R+1 to position R on the feed. To interpret a couple of these, this point on the left is saying moving from position 2 to position 1 increases the number of comments an article receives by about 40%. Pretty big treatment effect. It quickly deteriorates so as we move down the feed. But I think this isn't so surprising. Like we probably think the effect of moving from like position 23 to position 22 isn't maybe that large. And that's exactly what I find here. Okay, so that's my sort of brief aside into identification. And now I'll move on to my model of engagement decisions. Great. So I'm going to estimate a pretty simple model of users' engagement decisions. In this model, users will comment if two things are true. First, a user has to be exposed to an article. This is going to be modeled as a independent Bernoulli draw, where the probability of being exposed to an article depends on both the period, so there's some exogenous probability PT that a user is active in a period, as well as the article's rank. This is R. So conditional on being active, there's a probability PR of being exposed to an article in position R. Yes.
Behind you, if I could ask you to backtrack just a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna either ask a question or make a suggestion. I'm not sure which. So you know, you see the list of ranked articles, and the position clearly is very important. And then you have an article level current karma score next to, along with that position.
That's right.
And I'm curious how much we care about the position effect, the combined effect of position and karma versus the effect of karma in isolation.
if I see a low karma post ranked above a high karma post, I know that must be new and its quality is sort of unknown. Whereas the high karma post, I'm more certain about what I'm going to get if I click into that.
That's an interesting point. So this is not telling us that difference. This is, I do some balance tests, and actually the way I do this, I ensure that we're balanced on both post age and post vote score, which is the karma in this situation. So this is isolating the effective rank, holding these things fixed. But we could also do this RD. I guess just a brief aside, this is an RD with a two-dimensional running variable. So we have this like discontinuity frontier in this two-dimensional space. And I think you're asking about looking at other points in this frontier, which I have done. It's been a while. There wasn't a ton of heterogeneity, but yeah, I could revisit that. Yeah, thanks for the tip. Okay, back to the model. Users comment if they're exposed to an article. This is an independent Bernoulli draw. This is how rank impacts engagement. So the idea is that posts that are ranked lower on the feed, users are less likely to be exposed to these posts, and the treatment effects identify these parameters. Second, conditional on being exposed to an article, a user will comment if they're utility from doing so. It's the outside option. Utility here is a pretty standard widget. We have observed article features X. This includes things like a publisher slant, slant squared, publisher credibility, and a constant. We have individual preferences, beta I. We have a latent article period fixed effect. So this could capture, for example, how interesting an article is, but it could also capture anything else that users have vertical preferences for. So, for example, if users like commenting on articles with a lot of existing comments, this would load onto this procedure. Finally, there is a type 1 extreme value preference shock to give us nice choice probabilities. So there are a number of assumptions and restrictions in this model. I won't call them all out, but one I do want to call out is that rank is excluded from utility. So this is actually kind of important for allowing me to identify this model. What this means is that conditional on being exposed to an article, the article's position does not impact choice. I removed the slide from estimation and identification, which kind of wish I had. I'll just briefly talk you through it. The treatment effects identified the exposure probabilities, and then given this, the panel nature of the data set allows me to identify preferences and preference heterogeneity using maximum likelihood. Instead, I have this slide, which is sort of an intuitive estimation slide, I guess. And what I'm showing here is 3 example users. These are real users. I've changed their names. What I'm plotting for each user is the probability of them commenting on a post, conditional on being exposed to that post by their political, the article's political slant. So Liu, L for left, is much more likely to comment on left-leaning articles. Riley, R for right, is much more likely to be commenting on right-leaning articles. And then Morgan likes to comment on sort of more moderate articles. As I mentioned, users have heterogeneous preferences for slant squared. This allows me to calculate the user's most preferred political slant. I'll call this their bliss point. And we can ask what bliss point would we estimate for these 3 example users. So Liu, we get a bliss point of -1. They like commenting on articles that are very left-leaning. Riley, I estimate a bliss point of +1. And Morgan is somewhere between the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So hopefully this builds a little bit of confidence that we're actually inferring somewhat reasonable preferences from people's engagement patterns. These are, of course, 3 example users. We can look at the distribution of bliss point in the community, which is what I'm showing here. I think this gets a little bit to Justin's question. There is a large mass of people who look like Liu. There's actually a slightly bigger mass of people who look like Riley. This does not mean that they are Republicans. It means they like to comment on Republican-leaning articles. And then, of course, we have a mass of users slightly left of center, centered around the roughly the New York Times. As I mentioned, preferences here do not reflect sort of true political preferences. We could imagine that some of these people who like commenting on left-leaning articles are saying not so nice things. That is certainly certainly the case on Reddit, which is probably not too surprising. So we should really think about these preferences as propensity to comment on articles of a certain type, not true political preferences. Okay, So I now want to talk you through how the various counterfactual ranking algorithms work, and then summarize sort of the main findings of the paper. So I'm going to assume for every counterfactual that the platform perfectly observes beta I. This is the individual specific preference. This is motivated by the fact that the platform collects a lot of behavioral data on each user. So the assumption is that they can pin down pretty well what types of content a user is going to engage with. What the platform does not observe, however, is this XE term. This is the article period fixed effect. There's always new articles being added to the platform. The platform doesn't exactly know what's most interesting in a period, so they have to predict this. My model is a random forest, pure prediction problem, where we're predicting XE based on article observables. What this means is that for every user in every period, the platform can form a prediction of the likelihood that user is going to comment on each piece of content conditional on being exposed to that content. Yeah. And so this is exactly, I think, the term that Sima talked to us about yesterday. It's the probability of engagement conditional on being exposed. And then we can think about the platform sort of shifting attention through re-ranking articles to various articles, taking into account PHAT as well as other article observables. I anticipate a lot of questions about this, and my answer will largely be this is the partial equilibrium analysis. A lot of things would change in equilibrium. Some of these I'm working on addressing, others are a little bit harder to address, but I would, of course, love to hear your thoughts on what is most important to capture here. But I won't be thinking about things like a supply response or substitution among communities, et cetera. Okay, so I'm going to initially consider these four counterfactual ranking algorithms. The first two are benchmarks. This will include Reddit's actual ranking algorithm and a random benchmark where articles are just randomly shuffled. And then I'll think about both non-personalized and personalized engagement maximization. In each of these, we are sorting articles in descending order of their conditional engagement probability, the hat. Non-personalized adds the restriction that the same ranking of articles has to be shown to all users in a given period. Okay, before we show the aggregate results, I want to return to our sort of the example that I introduced. And so here I'm showing a real feed from the summer of 2016. So this is right around when the DNC emails were leaked. These are the top 4 articles under Reddit's actual ranking algorithm. And then what I'll show you next is going to be what the personalized engagement maximizing algorithm looks like for our 4 or 3, I guess, example users. And so what we'll see is that Liu on the left is promoted Slate, Huffington Post, MSNBC. Riley on the right sees Breitbart, the Washington Times. And these tend to be more politically slanted, slightly lower credibility publishers. While Morgan, on the other hand, sees The Hill, USA Today, Politico. These are pretty moderate and reasonably high credibility publishers. Sort of this simple example will explain like most of the results that I'm about to walk you through. So hopefully this was helpful in building some intuition for how these things actually work. Good, so now we can ask in the aggregate how engagement maximization impacts credibility. And to attack this problem, I'm going to plot on the x-axis the share of a user's engagement with high credibility publishers under Reddit's existing ranking algorithm. And on the y-axis, I'll plot the same quantity, but for the various counterfactual ranking algorithms. So the first thing we'll notice is that the non-personalized and random algorithms are right along the 45-degree line. And what this tells us is that these algorithms are not having a substantial impact on the composition of users' news diets. What I think is a little more interesting is the personalized engagement maximizing algorithm, which has this S shape. And so what this tells us is that users on the right who are already engaging with pretty high credibility publishers, they continue to do so, and they see the slight increase in the share of their engagement with high credibility publishers. While users on the left over here who are engaging with more dubious publishers under the baseline algorithm, they see this pretty substantial deterioration in the share of their engagement with high credibility publishers. And so this is what I meant at the outset when I said that engagement maximization is pushing users apart along this credibility dimension. We can, of course, ask which users would appear at which point in this graph. And given the example I showed you, I hope you would guess that it's going to be the Lius and the Morgans who are going to be experiencing the declines. Sorry, the Lius and the Rileys who are experiencing the declines. And the Morgans who have more moderate preferences are actually seeing the improvements in the quality of their news diets. This is exactly what we'll see. So here I'm plotting the change in the share of a user's engagement with high credibility publishers from the personalized engagement maximizing algorithm relative to the baseline algorithm, and the x-axis is a user's bliss point. So it is exactly the story of, people with preferences for politically extreme publishers are experiencing the deterioration in the quality of their news diets in this engagement maximizing. So what can we do about this? One thing we could do is include publisher credibility in the ranking algorithm. Here's one way to do this. Without going into too much detail, what this objective function is saying is that we are trading off maximizing for total engagement with high credibility publishers. And Lambda captures this trade-off. So if Lambda is 0, this just collapses down to the engagement maximizing allocation. If Lambda is 1, we're only maximizing for engagement with high credibility publishers. And we can, of course, think about interior values of Lambda as well. To summarize this analysis, I will plot for every counterfactual the share of the average user's engagement with high credibility publishers on the x-axis and total engagement normalized to 1 at the maximal value on the y-axis. So this point in blue is the personalized engagement maximizing algorithm. If we take Lambda all the way to 1, we get a credibility maximizing algorithm. By construction, engagement has to fall and credibility has to increase. But its location is kind of interesting. This corresponds to a 5% decline in total engagement. This is a pretty big effect, and I suspect no platform manager would entertain anything like this. And so I think the shape of this sort of efficient frontier as we vary Lambda is actually quite important. And what I mean by this is that you'll notice, at least locally, around the engagement maximizing algorithm, the top left, this frontier is very flat. And so what this tells us is that, at least locally, for small changes in total engagement, the platform can substantially increase the share of that engagement with high credibility publishers. You'll notice that we get almost halfway to the credibility maximizing algorithm for only a 1% decline in total engagement, which is not nothing, but is much more modest than a 5% decline.
Can I ask you to speculate about an analysis you haven't done? This is based on a static discrete choice model,
yes.
Conditioning on visitation.
Yes.
If you looked at the probability of return visitation, can you speculate on how that might change the frontier?
Yeah, so you're asking like a dynamic model of choice. I would love to see that model because that opens up a lot of interesting questions, like the short-term versus long-term engagement maximizing algorithm, what that might look like. Pure speculation, I wouldn't be shocked if users have some sort of like, two-cell model, and this is sort of a temptation good, the low credibility content, and so being exposed to those maybe makes them less likely to return to the platform. But I, of course, have no evidence of that. That is something I'd be super interested in knowing. So I think that's a really nice question. Okay. The other point I wanted to highlight on this frontier is the location of the non-personalized engagement maximizing algorithm. So again, by construction, this has to be on the interior of this frontier because we're adding a constraint to the optimization problem. But I think its location is actually quite interesting. And so I want to take us back to the outset of the talk where I talked about the common policy proposals to address some of these issues. And the most common policy proposal is to require platforms to allow users to opt out of personalized feeds. And oftentimes, they'll allow you to switch into a non-personalized engagement maximizing algorithm as an alternative. Okay, and so what the location of this green point is telling us is that this isn't going to have much impact on the composition of users' news diets. It's just going to reduce total engagement. So this seems to be a pretty inefficient solution to this problem. You'll notice that for the same amount of engagement, taking advantage of personalization allows us to vastly increase the quality of users' news diets. So I think it's important to think about how we can think about aligning the platform's incentives with society's preferences rather than this sort of naive regulation. Okay. The question? Yeah.
Yeah, about that plot. So here, non-personalized means it's not ranked, but I still show me the thing I follow.
Sorry, it is still ranked. It's just ranked to the average engagement probability. So I'm trying to maximize everyone's engagement rather than only your specific engagement.
Okay. But what I say is still based on what I follow.
Yes, yeah. So that's a separate question. So I think the question you're asking is like users subscribe to many communities. There is a home feed that aggregates content from all of these communities, and how am I thinking about that here? So the way I'm thinking about it is I'm conditioning on the location of all the other content in your home feed. And then the politics content is just going to be re-ranked. So in the non-personalized world, the order of the politics content is going to be the same for everyone. In the personalized world, it'll be specific for you. But I'm not thinking about moving around like the sports content that you follow or whatever, because the home feed does use the same algorithm as the subreddit feed. So this is captured in for example. Yeah, thanks. Okay. We can think about who is impacted by these various credibility-aware algorithms. It's probably not too surprising. As we increase lambda, we are pulling up users who like to engage or who tend to engage with less credible publishers. So I think this goes to show that personalization is not the issue in what's driving users apart. It is the objective function. If the objective function is to maximize engagement with high credibility publishers, we find that actually personalization can impress users along this credibility dimension. So really in personalization, that's the issue. In the paper, we do some other analyses. Common analysis with personalization is thinking about the diversity of content. So I look at how engagement maximization and personalization impacts the diversity of engagement across different publishers along the political spectrum. Consistent with some prior evidence, I find that engagement maximization and personalization produces individual engagement diversity. A little bit of a corollary to some of these findings, I find that personalized engagement maximization increases the demand for politically slanted and low credibility news publishers. So to the extent we think there might be some sort of supply response, this would be an important sort of fact to keep in mind of which types of content would be incentivized. Finally, I didn't talk about this too much today. I do analyze the sentiment of users' comments, and I pass these through the counterfactuals, and I find that engagement maximization slightly increases the share of negative sentiment comments, but the magnitude on this is actually pretty small, so I kind of think of this as a null result. There's not much change in the composition of comments along this sort of sentiment direction. And so with that, I will wrap up. My objective was to try and understand the trade-offs faced by the platforms when optimizing for engagement. To tackle this problem, I estimate a model of engagement decisions that I use to analyze counterfactual ranking algorithms. The three things I hope you take away from this talk are first, that engagement maximization exacerbates differences in the credibility of users' news diets. So again, it's pushing users apart along the credibility dimension, and this results in there being an increased market share of low credibility and politically slanted outlets. Second, managers have a pretty valuable tool to manage this trade-off in the form of these credibility-aware algorithms, where for a modest cost in terms of foregone engagement, the platform can substantially increase the share of engagement with high credibility publishers. And then finally, for policymakers, I think the most important takeaway is that personalization opt-outs seem to be an inefficient solution to this problem. And so I think it's worth studying more how we can think about aligning the platform's incentives with society's preferences. So I'm a couple minutes early. So after a great discussion, we'll be able to hit lunch a little early. So thank you all.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here on the second day of organizing this wonderful workshop. And a really great honor to have the opportunity to discuss from Alex. So I just learned from Alex that actually he's in the field of information system, and he actually started this project 2 years ago by himself, in all the data and the model. I'm really impressed by how fast he can converge with this amount of work. So I will first sum up my understanding of the paper. Actually, I found that the presentation he had today is slightly different from the paper I was reviewing. So maybe some of the comments, they only speak to the old version, not necessarily the content you have seen today. I think in this context, the research objective is quite straightforward. So it's about recommendation algorithm design. So when consumers are consuming content, based on their behavior engagement, the algorithm will collect the data, and with certain objective, then the algorithm will be trained to feed new content. So the phenomenon he is studying is because the algorithm is learning by maximizing the engagement, so end up user consuming lower quality content. Okay. So he wants to document the fact that user engagement can actually influence not only what you consume, but also the quality of the content you consume. And also to document to what extent the algorithm can promote incentives low content consumption. So lastly, he's interested in designing algorithm to go around this issue. So we can also, while we're maximizing the engagement, by also making sure using and consuming high quality content. So the context data he has is he focuses on the US political news on Reddit. The main reason I understand is in this context, he has a way to measure content quality compared with other kind of topics or other kind of platforms. So there are 3 types of data he used. Script the landing page for each subreddit. So he observed, ranked all the political news. And the public data on Reddit, individual posts and comments. So can know when which individual comments on each post. And also publisher ranking data, so he can measure the content quality. So the limitation with this context is there's no actual panel data to recover consumers' browsing history on the platform, so he can recover the choice and the non-choice. So this is really critical for the later choice modeling and also the counterfactual analysis. So the key measurement in this paper is user measurement. He focuses on the number of comments each post received. And the quality of the post is based on the publisher credibility of the embedded articles. So quality of the comments is using the text sentiment. So in his case, he focuses on positive sentiments as a measure of quality, as a good quality. So here is the overall approach. So he didn't present the number 2, but the paper I read, that's kind of the flow the paper goes. Start with quantifying the causal impact of the brand positions to the user engagement. In each case, is how many, the number of comments each post receives. After documenting that, he using a simulation study to show that using under the collaborative filtering algorithm, the algorithm will indeed fit the user with the content lower quality over time. With this tool, then he can develop his choice model with actually 3 decisions. Exposure probability and commenting. This is influenced by the ranking and commenting probabilities, and also the if I comment, what kind of sentiment I'm going to comment on. Then based on this choice model, he did the counterfactual. The goal is mainly to understand how the policy implication of different algorithm design, how we can design better algorithm to balance engagement and quality. So those are the things I really like about the paper. As I said, he does lots of effort in collecting the data from different sources and match them, and also developing various different models. I think he used reduced causal inference model, use machine learning model, using structure model to do counterfactual analysis. Basically, all the model you can think about is included in the same paper. And so it's really complicated, but I think it's he put lots of thoughts to tackle various issues he encountered due to some of the data limitation in this research agenda. I think it's a really good demonstration combining marketing theories and methodologies and a computer science approach in a relatively CS-focused topic. I see the CS topic, first topic because this is about algorithm design. So how we design better algorithm to optimize certain. So this is really a more CS-oriented topic. So the one of the first paper I feel is can really answer the question about content quality. Because in most cases, the quality is usually subjective, right? We cannot say uniformly this is bad quality or this is good quality. Even in some contexts like a Quora, I imagine there is a quality measure, but as the researcher, it's very hard for us to see, oh, this is a good answer, or that is a worst answer. So now I'm going to start some of the comments I have. First one is more the big picture, so the position in the paper. Because it tried to combine methodology from, I think, marketing, computer science, structure model. So it's a little bit hard for me to pin down what exactly the contribution relative to the literature. So there are 2 ways I think can potentially break it down. One is if the angle is really targeting the CS or the information system literature. then I think there's some innovation here. So this is the very first paper I have seen compared with the CS teacher trying to build some structure, right, in a simulated study to show that algorithm produce bias and how I correct that bias, right? That's kind of this one angle I think the paper can take. Another angle is more focusing on this managerial implication literature on filter bubble. We have really seen a lot yesterday, and also some for today also. So what's the new finding here? So the literature in filter bubble have already shown that the current system, especially content filtering and collaborative filtering, can create this confined individual to self-conforming feedback loop. This has been documented for almost 20 years. So lots of people show that the algorithm reduce diversity and giving people whatever they like. So in this paper, I found the finding actually is consistent. If I am a user, I'm interested in consuming low quality news because I have certain political stand, then that's who I am. Then because of my consumption over time, I'm going to consume low quality content. So this finding is consistent with this. So if this finding is the same, so what is new here? I think the author has to be think about, is it new here because I have a new context in the context politics, but I think there's a paper on QIME also on politics stance, right? And then is there a contribution about the metric? Because now you can really pin down, it's not only about stance, but also quality, right? I think that's, if this is the position you are taking, then the finding is not so novel, but then it's the context of metric. So now I'm going to discuss some of the more like details. So I felt when I reading the paper, I felt it has, in order to perform this research, researcher actually has two really big assumptions. Number one, the researcher assumed that personalized ranking that aim to enhance engagement, lower the quality of promoted content on digital content platform. Okay. This sounds not very super intuitive because usually we don't measure content quality. We know diversity is going down, concentration is going up, but it's not clear whether the content quality is going down or not, right? So I think it's in the writing the paper, I felt it's there need more space to talk about is this your hypothesis or this is a trend that's happening, just no one really tacked onto it, right? Or you are trying to show the empirical evidence, or you already think this is true, I want to stress this issue. So which one this paper is trying to do is not super clear to me. And the second point is, what do low quality content mean? I think some of the audience here also raised out to point that the content itself usually is objectively bad based on publisher credibility in this context, but it's not true on most digital content platforms. Even in the politics stand, content, I feel like if some consumers, they have certain political stance, then it's their right to consume this kind of content. Would you still claim this is a low quality content for them, right? So this actually affects the generalizability of the research topic. Also, the research finding I found is actually confirmed that users intentionally consume those low quality content because their own preferences, right? Rather than the algorithm is promoting. So if it's the first one is really an issue, right? Is how you can distinguish these two based on this data. The second assumption this paper is built on in order to perform is platforms maximize engagement by maximizing user present comment likelihood. I think in reality, the platform has object is multi-dimensional and also changing over time. I think Ken just raised the point, right? Am I really maximizing the present engagement or in the long run, right? Because people is changing, right? And also there's also user contribution we talked about yesterday, right? Because you're giving the engagement, it's not only I'm going to comment more, but that also influence people's content contribution, right? So maximizing engagement can also potentially generate more content on the platform as well. So this is also important, but that seems to be not necessarily in this current picture. But I think this is fun. But I think people need stronger motivation, right? See, this is something you can just look along without consider other potential objects. So the people actually have a simulation. I think Alex didn't show today. So he using observational data he had, individual user consumption different posts, he trained a collaborative filtering algorithm to simulate how the content quality is changing under this algorithm. I think we actually agree this seems to be not the core part of the paper. That's why he didn't present today. But I felt like this paper do need some evidence to start with before they start the choice model. I need some evidence, show some evidence that the content is going down over time, right? Across different type of user. And then you can also show, because you have a snapshot, then you can show how the quality is really exposed on average, right? To see maybe for some user, this deviation is stronger because they are, right? So if that, I think that's maybe a way to possibly entangle this. So without any external shock in this any kind of observation data, researcher cannot distinguish whether the effect of the curation from user satisfaction, right? So really, I enjoy consuming this content, or it's because the platform gave me the content, so I'm forced to consume them. But I think there's some descriptive analysis required in this data to show in this context. Despite that, people are really self-selecting to consuming this low content quality. There's still additional deviation because of the algorithm. I think if this evidence can be potentially shown, then that kind of better motivate the paper and doing the structure model and kind of factor analysis. So here I just gave some of the minor point on this simulation. So the algorithm design for the position, in fact, I think this is really clever. It's to leverage the open source information about how the platform decides how to rank. So he leveraged this regression discontinuity to pin down the causal effect. So I just have some maybe clarification question. One is by reading the paper, it's not clear to me about you just mentioned the ranking algorithm was used in 2017, but it was not clear when I was reading the paper when the snapshot was collected, whether that period is reflect the actual ranking algorithm, right? So I think this is the first one you can show the snapshot time window algorithm was indeed based on the open source the ranking. And Alex has done some work to check the correct balance between the discontinuing point, but I think you mostly focus on I think metrics which I didn't list up here, right? So I think there's additional cohort you have to check for balance. One is actually what Ken just mentioned. There could be two potential drivers. One is position. One is accumulated karma, right? So it's a few comments right before each snapshot is balanced, before and after, right? And who posts the articles, because that could also potentially influence the engagement and the content of post and the candidate. Those seem to be now there when you do the regression discontinuity. So for the choice model, I think I have just some question regarding the data, because the data actually is basically you can just scrape Reddit, you got all the comments from individual users, but there are lots of approximation that you also has done. One is how to approximate the number of non-choice users using public status on active community members, right? But this is a huge approximation. It's just the whole community, but what you really started is the sub-community. So how you can move this approximation from the entire platform to the really sub-community you are studying. And this approximation also has to be varying across individual and also varying across time. I think there's some maybe potentially some measurement errors. So for each user I, the researcher only observed the actual comment, but not with the action. I think this actually relates to the previous point, how you use this huge aggregate approximation, right? To pin down each individual user at a different time point. And this part I don't know is how you recover the actual red list per user, because if a user subscribe to multiple subreddits, then politics maybe mixed with marketing and entertainment. So this you don't observe, right? I don't know how you can deal with this. Is the part I'm not clear by reading the paper. Okay. So other things about the choice model, I think you could use MFCC to inference, since there's so much large number of parameters compared with using maximum likelihood. I think the other additional metrics you can consider to reporting. And I think another thing was sentiment and the quantity measure. That's something I'm not pretty sure, because negative comment doesn't mean it's low quality, because the post itself will talk some really sad news, right? Then as a viewer, I will react by seeing something consistent, which is negative, but it doesn't mean my negative comment is low quality. I think that you have to maybe think about, is it really a negative? It's a good measure of content quality in this particular case, or you may want to control for the sentiment in the original post. So for the counterfactual analysis, I mostly have some thoughts on the contribution. So I was not super clear what's the so how to like position this counterfactual analysis in the literature, because as far as I know, lots of platforms like Bing, Google, Facebook, they do have credibility score and one input when they rank ads or rank articles. So it's not new that it's not that they have never done this to all the platforms now. I don't know what the Reddit is doing now, but the other platform right now, they use that as a part input to rank the algorithm, right? So if that's the case, so what is the contribution here? So one idea I thought could potentially be all those platforms, they are using a black box. You only know it's there, but you don't know how much contribution or weight it played there. But in your algorithm, it seems to be more transparent, right? Then as a platform, I know exactly, I can quantify the contribution of different inputs. Well, that could be a potential differentiation from the existing algorithm, which already incorporate credibility as the input. Okay. So so last thing, other suggestion, I think the author may need to think about, because there's so much extrapolation from limited data information. There are lots of assumptions. I think some is minor, some is more severe. To think about which assumption you have to make, what's the evidence, how to back up. And there's some measurement errors and a little bit confounders. I have to lay out those things more clearly. And could be empirical, also be improved by removing some of the redundancy and the better clarity. And also overall, I found there's so much things in the paper, it could potentially become two papers. And the one is just focusing on the causal impact on the position, because then you can detail all the data, robustness checks, right, various heterogeneities. Another paper maybe using the this method and do the choice model and the counterfactual showing an algorithm with transparency and maybe even better performance. Okay, that's all for my discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. A lot to think about. Super sympathetic to the limitations of the data. The comments on the motivation are super helpful. One thing I did want to maybe follow up on is how I view this, like, if users like consuming low credibility content, is that a bad thing? And I'm totally sympathetic to that. So I'm doing this as a positive analysis. I certainly don't want to make a claim on like what type of weight we should put on publisher credibility. So I appreciate you calling that out. But yeah, thank you so much for this guy.
So lunch is back in